Alternative doctors to be charged with manslaughter. How to read anti-alternative medicine propaganda, or how to read anti-ozone propaganda. Hi guys, here's Paula, the crazy ozone lady, and this live stream will be a little bit, let's say, political, a little bit of a rant. So I will talk about a new legislation that is being proposed in the United Kingdom. And if that legislation passes, then doctors, medical doctors, alternative doctors who use alternative treatments on cancer patients will be charged with manslaughter or with grievous bodily harm. So there's a broad coalition of politicians in the UK which wants to see this law passed. So those were two articles which talked about this proposed legislation, which were published in the Telegraph, which is a UK-based news outlet. And so I will read the last article, which was published September the 5th. And so here it is: sellers of false cancer cures may face criminal charges. So now the interesting thing is that those articles, so this article and another one which was published in August of this year, so they are now behind a paywall. So the Telegraph, the way it works, I believe, is that they first publish things and the articles are freely available for anyone to read. But this is only temporary, and then after a week or so they disappear, and you have to actually subscribe to their service in order to read this. So this is what I did in order to be able to talk about this. So I subscribed to their subscription service. They give like 1 month free, and then you can cancel the subscription. So because I found that this is so important to talk about this, that I did that. So I first will read the article and talk about what they're proposing, and then I will also analyze it, and I will talk about the propaganda that is employed here. So because there's a certain process, there's a certain emotional manipulation that takes place in the mass media, and the way that things are framed and presented, and the way that facts and numbers are not disclosed, that this leads to foster and to control a certain reaction in the population. And this leads to the public, in the end, supporting legislation which is to their own detriment. But this is done in such a clever way that people, when it happens, people are not aware of it. So this is something that I want to talk about here in this video, because those articles are textbook anti-alternative medicine propaganda. They're a textbook government propaganda, and I believe that it is very important that we know how to decode and how to analyze and read this type of propaganda, because the thing is, the facts are that our rights are being taken away more and more, and our lives are being more and more restricted. And this all happens with the support of the public. And how they do this is really interesting to see. And but the only way to prevent this from happening in the future, and the only way to prevent this from happening to alternative medicine and to ozone therapy, because ozone therapy is part of alternative medicine, is to be aware of this and to call them out when this happens. So without further ado, so let's get to it. So the Telegraph reports: sellers of false cancer cures may face criminal charges. Practitioners who administer fake treatments could face criminal charges under the newly proposed legislation. This is September the 5th, 2020. So now, okay, so one other thing. So you may think, okay, well, this is the United Kingdom, so it doesn't really concern me because I'm in the United States or in Australia or wherever. Well, fact of the matter is that such legislation is often proposed by lobbyists who work for big global corporations, and those types of corporations, they act on a global market, not on a local market. So if this law will pass in the United Kingdom, it is very likely that it will also pass in other countries, in the United States and the rest of Europe. And there's actually already also talk about such a legislation also in Ireland. So here this is something that came out in August of last year in the Irish Times. And here's also a call to pass legislation to protect vulnerable cancer patients from bogus cancer cures, which of course translated means to protect them from their own choices and from being free to choose what they want to do with their bodies. So let me go on here. So practitioners who administer fake treatments could face criminal charges under the newly proposed legislation. Health Minister Joe Churchill told the House of Commons this week that the government plans to act to protect the most vulnerable people from dangerous and cruel cancer cure propaganda. Shadow Culture Minister Chris Matheson told MPs that he had raised the issue because he had lost a constituent in horrendous circumstances following bogus cancer treatments. But it is not disclosed what those horrendous circumstances were. And although it is not said here that the person died because of those bogus cancer treatments, but it is kind of implied that that's what happened. The plan is to bring in new legislation as part of the online harms bill, Mr. Matheson said. Talks have been going on, and my view is that these bogus practitioners are charlatans and con artists and must be treated as such. We are going after them. So, and then it goes on to say, he noted that based on the injuries sustained by his late constituent during treatment, the alternative practitioners who administered the fake medicines should be liable to GBH. So GBH stands for grievous bodily harm or manslaughter charges. And that new legislation was being examined to make such prosecutions available to authorities in the future. The government has said that the landmark online harms bill will contain the most robust action to counter illegal content online and keep the UK public safe. So this is also, this is important to note what this is about, to restrict further the speech and restrict what is allowed to be said online, because they want to block certain topics online. News that the bill could help protect cancer patients was welcomed by relatives of victims who have died following bogus treatments. I'm pleased to hear that new legislation is being considered that will help to protect patients from the dangers of alternative medicine, said Lorna Halliday, whose mother, Linda, died after taking fake cancer medicines. Government action now will help protect lives in the future. And then also the bill has the support of Dr. Asim Malhotra, consultant cardiologist and professor of evidence-based medicine, who said, "These new measures are a welcome blessing. It is the government's duty to protect the most vulnerable in our society from dangerous treatments and exploitation." And when you read it like this, then it kind of also makes sense. And you think, okay, yeah, I know someone who is sick with cancer, or I know someone who died of cancer, and this is a horrible situation to be in. Maybe it was even a family member that you lost or that is currently sick with cancer. And then you're thinking, I would hate those people to be exploited on top of the health problems that they're going through. Now they also have to deal with charlatans and con artists who prey on those poor people. And so, yes, the government should pass legislation to protect people, to protect cancer patients who are vulnerable. They should absolutely be protected, right? It makes all sense, right? And yet we have to look deeper. We have to look at the manipulation that is going on and the things that are not being told. So this is, as I said, so this came out on September 5th. But prior to this, there was an article that was linked to here. And so when you click on it, you come here to this article. And here, what this article talks about, the same thing basically, but it also presents a number of cases of people who were diagnosed with cancer and who were treated alternatively and then passed away. And so how this is presented here, how this is done, this is really textbook emotional manipulation. And so I presented here something to show how this works. So how to read anti-alternative medicine propaganda. So in order to decode the propaganda that you're exposed to and to really understand what you're reading and to look deeper into the information, you need to be aware of the tactics that are being used. And so number one tactic that is being used is an emotional appeal. And there can be actually several emotional appeals. So one which comes up the most frequently is fear. So they want to elicit fear. So in this case, fear of dying, of course, and also fear of losing your family or your friends. So family members who may be sick with cancer. So these types of articles, they produce the fear, they want to evoke fear in their readers of losing your friends or your family members to unscrupulous charlatans and con artists. And also another emotional appeal is to want to protect the vulnerable. And this is also a type of an instinct in many people, that when we see people in distress, people who cannot help themselves, and we want to protect them and we want to help them. And this article, when it talks about legislation, about law that is designed to protect people, right? And here where it says, here Dr. Asim Malhotra is being quoted saying, it is the government's duty to protect the most vulnerable. So when people read this, they think, yeah, that makes sense, absolutely, right? So those are emotional appeals that are being used. Then another thing that is used is a 3-step process. And this 3-step process consists always of problem, reaction, solution. With the solution as good as always being some new law, regulation, or legislation, the effect of which is that we have less rights, that we have less choice, and that then the government is bigger, and that big corporations are protected. So whatever the problem is, whatever the reaction, the solution, it nearly as good as always comes out to this. Less rights, less choice, less competition in the markets, more government-protected monopolies of the big corporations. Now the problem can be really anything and everything, like literally anything and everything. So it can be something that is an actual problem. It can be something that just pertains to a tiny percentage of the population, so it's really negligible. It can be something that used to be a problem in the past, but now isn't a problem anymore. So when you, for example, a good example of this is the measles infection and vaccines. So when you look at the chart that shows how many measles infections there were per year, when you look at the chart that shows that goes like 100 years back, then it will show you that measles infections started going down drastically by themselves, I think around the turn of the last century, so between the 1800s towards the 1900s, and by the 1950s, measles infections were already at a minute rate. But this was, so measles was basically disappearing on its own, but by the 1950s. But this is where the vaccine was introduced. So essentially when measles infections were close to zero or near zero, They implemented the measles vaccines, and they also implemented the duty, the requirement to vaccinate your children. But a problem can be also something that is actually beneficial, that is not a problem at all. A good example of this is CO2, carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide is the life molecule on our planet. So there will be no life, no plant life, no animal life, no human life without CO2. If there's no CO2, nothing will grow. So CO2 is part of the photosynthesis, which is the process of how plant life is created. So plant life is created out of sunlight and CO2. And so if you don't have CO2, you don't have plants. And now they're making us believe that basically CO2, which is the life-sustaining molecule on this planet, is toxic. They're telling us this is toxic, that needs to be taxed, needs to be regulated, needs to be reduced. So there is no idea that is too absurd and too easily to falsify, because really anyone can look up the equation for photosynthesis online that can be manipulated into a problem. So really a problem can be anything and everything. And in this case, this is also a manipulation. And I will show and I will explain why. So in this case, this is cancer patients who dare to choose for themselves the treatments that they want to undergo, and who decide whether they want to do conventional treatment or not. And the reaction is this emotional appeal. So this is a controlled reaction. So through omission of certain facts, through the highlighting of other information, through emotional appeals, the reaction is controlled. So they want you to be fearful, and they want you to appeal to the government or support the government, and this is exactly what they achieve, and it's really clever how they do this. And the solution, as I said, is always the same: some law, some legislation, which leads to us having less rights and less choices what we are allowed to do with our own bodies and in our own lives. And another point is lying by omission. So this article by the Telegraph, and the Telegraph is, it's a serious publication. And yet they're publishing complete garbage. And the reason for this, because they are not telling you certain facts. They're not putting the things that they're publishing in context. And the best example of this is, of course, now what has been done with the coronavirus. So as good as everyone can cite the numbers of people that have died because of corona in their countries. And some people can do this. Basically, they're updating their numbers in real time, and they can tell you this by the hour. But yet those numbers don't mean anything if you do not know how to put them in context, and they're never being put in context. And the same here happens with those cancer patients and in this article. And there's also a number of insinuations in this article. So it's things that are not explicitly said, but which are assumed to be true when you read this article. It's number one, that it's a widespread problem, that it's a big percentage of people, maybe the majority of people, who opt out of conventional cancer treatments and choose to use alternative cancer treatments instead. Another one is that it was the alternative treatment that killed them. So the way things are framed, it's not said explicitly. So they don't say the patient received some infusions from some alternative doctor and the infusions killed them. No, but the way they phrase this. So let me give you an example for this. So, For example, so here, okay, this is another example of an emotional appeal, all right? So this is a woman with her children, Arabella Vanek, and so it says here, mother was victim of unscrupulous medical practitioner. And so this is another emotional appeal. You see here really nice people. They're laughing and smiling, and you're thinking, oh my God, look, they're such nice people. I would hate to see them be hurt or something horrible happen to them. So this is already part of the emotional manipulation. So it says here, in late December 2012, Dr. Julian Kenyon told a supposed cancer patient that a sound wave light bed treatment could successfully kill tumor cells in 8 out of 10 late-stage cancer sufferers. The doctor did not realize that he was walking to an undercover reporter who had been filming his every word. Kenyon was subsequently hauled in front of a fitness to practice panel. It was found that this claim and others had brought his profession into disrepute. So this doctor was guilty of this horrendous crime of having brought his profession into disrepute by claiming that some light bed treatment can successfully kill tumor cells. Now, I don't know whether this is correct or not, whether this light bed treatment can do this or not. And this Dr. Julian Kenyon also has not been asked about his opinion and has not been contacted for this article. Now, the year before the undercover sting, Dr. Kenyon, this dangerous criminal who brought his profession into disrepute by committing a thought crime, treated Arabella Vanek. Mrs. Vanek twice received sonophotodynamic therapy at Kenyon's Hampshire-based Dove Clinic. She died 9 months after her final treatment session. Okay, so you see, this is an example of what I was talking about here, that this insinuation that was the alternative treatment that killed her. So they say she received this photodynamic therapy and 9 months later she died. So, oh my God, all right, so here she gets a treatment, 9 months later she dies. Okay, it must be a clear case of being killed by this sonophotodynamic therapy. Well, they don't say it outright, but this is the image they invoke in the reader. Arabella left behind 5 children and her husband, Joshua Vanek. And so, again, a tearjerker, a mother of 5 children. So this is indeed tragic. But then they don't tell you the whole story. And here is what I mean with lying by omission. Because here they say, after the most wonderful care from the NHS, and the NHS, that stands for National Health Services, which is the equivalent of Medicare, I believe, in the United States, we were told that there was no further treatment available. Now, what does this tell us? This tells us that Mrs. Vanek, before she went to this alternative doctor, she actually received conventional cancer treatment. All right? So, but they don't say what it was. Was it chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, or a combination of those things? We don't know. But what is clear is that she absolutely first went to the doctor and did everything that you're supposed to do. So she was following the conventional route, she was following the program, but it either didn't work out or it did work out, but then the cancer came back. We don't know. In any case, the NHS, they told her they cannot do anything anymore for her, and they basically sent her home to die. But Arabella was still keen to look for options, and it was then that she fell under the influence of Dr. Kenyon. So basically what happened is that she received either chemotherapy or radiation or surgery or a combination of those things. It didn't work out. The doctors, the conventional cancer doctors, told her, we cannot do anything for you. But instead of just accepting her fate, she started looking for other options. She didn't want to give up, right? So this is the story, right? But they don't tell you this explicitly. You actually have to read into this and read really carefully. And also, instead, what they do, they just glance over it really quickly and then go back to this Dr. Kenyon, who tried to take care of Arabella and to find out, maybe he could help her. So this is the story, right? But it didn't work out, and she tried a few things, some Russian technology and so on, and 9 months later she died. To make it look as if it was the treatment that she received 9 months before that killed her is absolutely crazy. Because what happened also is that after she stopped going to this Russian doctor, she went back to her conventional doctor, and what the conventional doctor did was, hold on a second, let me find this here. Such treatment, In the end, it was our wonderful GP, general practitioner, who checked her array of pills and decided to stop most of them immediately. All right, so what happened chronologically was this. She receives the last treatment, this photo treatment from the alternative doctor. Then she sees her general practitioner, so her conventional doctor. That conventional doctor tells her to stop taking most of the supplements that the alternative doctor prescribed to her. And then months later, she dies. And they present it as if this photo treatment, photo light treatment, or whatever that was that she received 9 months earlier caused her demise. But, you could just make the same argument. You could tell, maybe it was the general practitioner who took her off the pills. Maybe if she had continued with the pills, she would still be alive, or she would have died maybe a little later. But those are the type of manipulations that they're doing. And so, okay, so this was an example of how they presented as if the alternative treatment was the cause of the death, where we can see that, no, you cannot make this argument because she tried everything, right? And she was basically sent home to die. Now, another example of this is this young man here, who was in a documentary. So Sean Walsh, he was just 18 years old. And again, it is highlighted here, it is presented here as if it was an alternative methods that killed him. So what he did was coffee enemas, cannabis oil, and he also was visiting a homeopath. So he was also taking homeopathic medicine, and he was tracking his progress or lack of progress with thermographic cancer detection. And so this article again makes it look as if it was those treatments that killed Sean. But again, the reality looks a little different. And again, you have to be very careful in reading this and understanding the situation, because the whole story looks like this. So Sean Walsh was just 18 years old when he was first diagnosed with cancer. After conventional medical treatment, his cancer went into remission. So again, this is not a case of someone who discovered that he has cancer and then goes right to an alternative practitioner and forgoes conventional treatments. No, he did it the way they tell you to do it. So he went to the oncologist, to the conventional cancer doctor, and he underwent conventional medical treatment. Here it says. But it didn't last. So yes, he went to remission, but the cancer came back. And it says, when it returned just 2 years later, Sean decided that he would try to cure the cancer with alternative methods, including coffee enemas and cannabis oil. So here's the situation. So this 18-year-old man, so this is something that can be also found in a different article about this documentary and about those cancer patients. So this young man, he underwent a grueling chemotherapy treatment. here it is described there. They talk a little more here about him. So it was for 6 months he underwent chemotherapy, which was absolutely grueling. So anyone who knows someone who had chemo done, so I lost my mom to pancreatic cancer, and she received chemotherapy, and it's absolutely horrendous. You're losing, people lose their hair, their body just get destroyed, they are absolutely exhausted, lack of energy, they cannot think straight, and it's just a horrendous treatment. So nevertheless, he stuck through it for 6 months, all right? So he did all that, and it helped for 2 years. Then the cancer comes back. And now, of course, he has the chance. I mean, he has the choice. I mean, he's an adult. So why take away the choice from him and to say, okay, look, I tried chemo. Let me try now something else, right? But that's exactly what they want to do. So they want to take away that type of choice from people who already went through hell. But instead, they want to tell them, no, you're not allowed to try anything else, or you have to again go through hell the same way you did before, without much hope that it would help longer this time. So really, I cannot imagine anything more cruel than what they're proposing. So those are those type of stories that they present as if people died because they underwent alternative treatments, but in reality, they actually first did conventional treatments. They didn't work or worked only temporarily, and only then did they switch to alternative treatments. Right? But if you're not careful, if you just read too quickly, then you will skip this and you will completely miss this point. But this is those types of articles. This is how they are written. They're designed to create a certain reaction in your head. All right. So yeah. So those are the assumptions that those types of articles harbor. So it's they present it as if it was the alternative treatment that killed the people, whereas it's not always the case. Some patients, they really completely forgo any type of treatment, any type of conventional treatment, and do alternative treatments. But even then, you cannot say, okay, was it the alternative treatment that killed them, or would they have died anyway? Maybe it was the alternative treatment that prolonged their lives. Now, another insinuations that those articles make is that conventional cancer treatments are better and that are based on science. Okay, so now let's look at this. Let's look whether this is really the case. And so there was one study that was performed in 2004. Let me see if I can find this. I believe it's not this one. Okay, this is this one. All right, so they looked at cancer patients in, I believe it was Australia and United Kingdom and in the USA. And so the title of this is The Contribution of Cytotoxic Chemotherapy to 5-Year Survival in Adult Malignancies. So what they wanted to find out is what type of an advantage does chemotherapy give people? So how much, so after 5 years, if they look basically at cancer patients after 5 years after they received the cancer treatments, and then they compared people who received chemotherapy in combination with other treatments or people who only received other treatments without chemotherapy. And so what they found out is that people who had received chemotherapy, on average, this resulted in a 2.3% higher survival rate, or 2.3% more people were alive of those who had received chemotherapy as in comparison to those who did not receive chemotherapy. And so, but this, okay, important to note is here that this differed a lot from cancer to cancer. So there were some cancers For example, here testicular cancer, I think it's called. So here it seems that doing chemotherapy gives you a nearly 42% advantage. Okay, so for patients who have a testicular cancer, it may actually make sense to undergo chemotherapy. And the same also for patients who have Hodgkin's disease. Here, this gives patients an advantage of 36%. But all the others, there were, for example, head and neck cancer, 2.5%, esophagus, 4.8%, stomach cancer, 0.7%, colon cancer, 1.8%. And here where you see the dash means 0. The dash does not mean there is no data, it means 0. So basically there was no difference whether patients received chemotherapy or if they did not receive chemotherapy. Okay, it did not give them any advantage. All right, so but this is what here those types of articles make people believe that basically if only the patients had undergone scientific, conventional, evidence-based medicine like chemo, radiation, or surgery, then they would live longer. Well, it may be true for certain cancers and for certain treatments, like for example, surgery in people who have breast cancer. The survival rate there is around 90%, and this is most likely because breast cancer, if it is not metastasized, can be so easily surgically removed. But when it comes to chemotherapy, you can't really say that that this has anything to do with a better treatment that gives you a better chance of survival. And okay, so this was one. So this was this. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, another insinuation or assumption that the article makes is that stricter laws will save lives. So that basically if you prohibit people from receiving alternative treatments for cancer, that this will save their lives. But when you look at those examples, at the two cases, this one woman and Sean, that I just highlighted, you cannot really make this conclusion, right? Because they both tried conventional treatments and it did nothing for them. This woman here, she was sent home to die after she tried conventional treatments. So how can you say that that prohibiting alternative treatments to them, it will save lives? And so now imagine the situation. So imagine the situation where you had your surgery, you had chemo, and maybe even radiation on top of it. So you basically, you did everything, you tried everything that your doctor told you to do. And then some years later, the cancer comes back. And now this time, let's say the doctor tells you, sorry, we can't do anything anymore for you, just like Mrs. Vanek was told, right? Because that's exactly what happened. After the most wonderful care from the NHS, we were told that there was no further treatment available. But now instead of saying, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and try this crazy alternative treatment, even if my chances that it will work are maybe 1 in 1,000 or maybe 1 in 1,000,000, let me try it, right? Maybe I am that 1 in 1,000,000 where it will work, right? But no. If this law passes, then basically they will take away for you this possibility. The law will basically tell you, no, we know better, and no, you are not allowed to try this alternative treatment. No, even if the chances that it will work are very, very slim, you are still not allowed to try it. So you basically, the law would basically take away all hope from cancer patients. I mean, I cannot imagine anything more cruel than this. But what the law will most likely do is that it will protect the bottom line of big pharmaceutical corporations, because So the drug for cancer chemo treatments, this is a $100 billion global market. So there's a lot of money involved. So if you pass a legislation that will basically force patients to undergo conventional cancer treatments and to never look at any alternative treatments, then who will benefit from it? The big global corporations, right? Okay, but another point that I want to talk about is here lying by omission. So the fact that they're just omitting facts, they're omitting also the context. So this article and the other, they make it look as if it was a huge problem. And there was another article that also was published last year, How to Survive the Fake News About Cancer. And it was also talking about a growing problem, but it didn't say, none of those articles, none of them, they tell you, okay, how many people actually forego conventional cancer treatment and how many decide to do alternative treatments, right? So I looked into it, and it turns out that the amount of people who decide to not do any type of conventional treatment, so no chemo, no radiation, no surgery, no hormone therapy, is vanishingly small. It's around 1%. 1% of patients refuse all types of cancer treatments. Now for chemotherapy, this is slightly higher. Here it says they found it was 12.5%, but other publications, they found numbers of around 3%. But it can range between 3 and 30%. So for chemo, it's a little higher. And there's also other treatments like surgery or hormone therapy that can also range like in the 20 or 30% range. But overall, it can be as low as 1%. So the overwhelming majority of people who are diagnosed with cancer choose to undergo some form of conventional cancer therapy, be it chemotherapy, surgery, or radiation, or a combination of those things. So this is another way how those people lie to you. They don't put the situation in context, and they make it look like as if it was an urgent matter that requires immediate, drastic, strict legislation, without telling you, okay, how many people are really affected by this. So this is what I call lying by omission. All right, so this was like, this one publication said it was 1%, but here I found another source which said that 8% had refused treatment, postponed filling or not filled prescriptions, or skipped doses of prescribed medications. All right, but it said that, okay, between 7 and 10% of people either skip treatments or they skip doses. So they don't completely stop the conventional cancer treatment, but they don't adhere to it 100%. So again, this is really a tiny number. So anything, so it's between 1 and 10%. But also the question is, okay, so as I said, another assumption, another unspoken assumption that they're presenting us with is that conventional cancer treatments are better based on science. And so here the Lancet, which is a very prestigious publication, they published something September 2018 about fake news and oncology. And then someone said, how has society got to this point where unproven interventions are being chosen in preference to evidence-based effective treatments, right? But as we saw, the effective treatments when it comes to chemotherapy are really not that effective. And here's another publication that said, that was from June 2018, that talks about, again, effectiveness of chemotherapy, but specifically for breast cancer. And they found out here, so here, look, 5 years after treatment, the rate of overall survival was 98.1% for those who had chemo and 98% for those who did not. 9 years after treatment, the rate of overall survival was 93.8% for those who had chemo and 93.9% for those who did not. So they're talking about women who have received surgery for breast cancer. So basically their breasts were removed. And then the standard treatment, or I don't know whether the standard, but in many cases, what was done that after the surgery, the woman also received chemotherapy, I guess in order to make sure that there were no metastases. And then they looked back at the data and they found out that when they survived, the women who had surgery plus chemo with the women who only had surgery, so they found out that the benefit was a difference of 0.1%. All right. So the survival rate, what was it? 5-year survival rate and 9-year survival rate. So for the group who had received surgery and chemo, they had an improvement. The group was larger by 0.1%. And in the 9-year survival rate, the difference was the same, 0.1%. All right. So basically, thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of women were subjected to chemotherapy, although this was completely unnecessary. And they also say this. They say that now that those numbers came out, they came to the conclusion that basically in 70% of all cases, they can forego the additional chemotherapy. Now I can find it out here. With results of this groundbreaking study, we now can safely avoid chemotherapy in about 70% of patients who are diagnosed with the most common form of breast cancer. Okay, but they found this out only in 2018, right? Now, when we look at the statistics in the US for breast cancer, so we can see here that per year there are around 280,000 new cases of breast cancer. All right. So now let's assume that most of them have received, were either treated with surgery or with chemotherapy up until 2018. Then we get the result that most likely thousands of women then came down with a secondary cancer due to the chemotherapy. How do we know this? Because there is such a thing as secondary cancers, and they come after chemotherapy. So this is here the American Cancer Society, which talks about this risk of developing second cancers after chemotherapy and targeted therapy. So, and they say that exactly this can happen. So that chemotherapy is associated with secondary cancers that are most likely caused by the chemotherapy. And now the question is, okay, well, how often does this happen? How many people who receive chemotherapy come down with secondary cancer because of chemotherapy? And so here, this is explained here in this paper, non-Hodgkin lymphoma secondary to cancer chemotherapy. And they come to the conclusion that between 3% and 20% of people who received chemotherapy then come down with secondary cancers. So now if you multiply this, so if you multiply this number, okay, so let's say 250,000 women, if you multiply this by 3% or 20%, then what you get is thousands of women, so between 5 and around, I think, 50,000 women who will come down with secondary cancer because of their cancer treatment. All right, and so this is this great evidence-based and scientific treatment that the Lancet here talks about. How has society got to this point where unproven interventions are being chosen in preference to evidence-based effective treatments, the effective treatments. So, as far as the effective treatments goes, this is, I think we need much more information to learn how effective those conventional treatments are, because I would like to know how many people who have been diagnosed with cancer are being told by their doctors that their chances of survival when they undergo chemotherapy on average only increases by 2.3%, right? So this is this type of effective cancer treatment that they're selling us. So let's see what else I wanted to talk about. So this is you see, this is a standard, a textbook problem, reaction, solution case where the problem is not well defined. We don't know. We're not being told how many people are affected, how many people tend to opt out of conventional cancer treatment. None of this tells us how many people first do conventional and then alternative, how many people only do alternative treatments, how many people, what are the survival rates between alternative and conventional treatments. None of this is disclosed. We don't know. The reaction is just a tearjerker, so we are being manipulated to feel sorry for the weak and vulnerable, and of course fear is stoked that if you come down with cancer, or a family member comes down with cancer, that will be preyed upon by con artists and charlatans, and fake cures will be sold to them, and that those fake cures will then lead to their demise. And then the solution is this proposed legislation, and which will prohibit people from seeking alternative treatments and from giving them a possible second chance. But the legislation will in all likelihood protect the bottom line of big corporations. So this is a textbook case of this problem, reaction, solution scam that we're being told here. And we just need to be aware of this and know how to read this type of anti-alternative medicine propaganda. Because just as they're doing this here with alternative medicine, and this includes also ozone therapy, but the same thing they can do specifically with ozone therapy, and they have done this specifically with ozone therapy in the past. Because every case of someone having received ozone therapy, and if there was some problem or a cancer, there were cases reported in the media in the past where cancer patients, they sought ozone therapy, and they were already in late stages, and stage 4 cancer cases. They had already tried conventional treatments. Then they finally tried ozone therapy, and then they died anyway. And then it was presented as if it was the ozone therapy that killed the stage 4 cancer patients. So they've done this in the past, they keep doing this, and the result is always ever shrinking rights of what we are allowed to do with our bodies, and ever shrinking choices. So that was my rant for now. So look out for this kind of crap and don't fall for it. Thank you very much for listening, and see ya.